Loki's most dangerous trick, the theft of Idunn's apples. There are stories that whisper about mischief, and then there are stories that warn. Stories that feel like a slow breath taken before a storm, reminding anyone who listens that even the smallest act of carelessness can unravel the very threads that hold a world together. This is one of those stories. It begins not with thunder, nor with the clash of blades, but with a question the gods rarely dare to ask. What keeps immortals from fading? It is a quiet question, subtle and unsettling, a question that reveals the fragility beneath divine confidence. Because even the mighty Aesir, shining gods of Asgard, held onto their youth and strength by the slimmest gift, the apples of Idunn. And the day Loki decided to interfere with that gift became one of the most dangerous moments in all the 9 realms. But the story does not start with Idunn, nor even with her apples. It begins with Loki, restless, clever, haunted by the constant pressure of being the odd shape in a world of straight lines. For all his sharp wit and quick smile, Loki carried inside him a restless fire, something flickering between pride and insecurity. He wanted to belong to the Aesir, yet he wanted freedom from them. He wanted admiration, yet recoiled from constraints. He sought to prove himself indispensable, yet instinctively ruined the very things that made him needed. That paradox beat inside him like a second heart, and it was this divided heart, more than malice alone, that would open a doorway to disaster. The tale begins on a day that seemed harmless, bright, brisk, and deceptively ordinary. The sky above Midgard gleamed with early spring, winds carrying the scent of thawing snow and quiet forest soil. Odin, king of the gods, had sent a group of Aesir to investigate strange happenings in the distant mountains, shadows slipping where there should be none, strange roars echoing at night, and travelers found wandering in confusion as though their memories had been brushed away. For such mysteries, Odin wanted answers, and he wanted the silver-tongued Loki with him, not for his trust, but for his usefulness, an invisible distinction that Loki felt like a sting beneath the skin. They traveled with the brisk efficiency of gods who had done such things countless times. Alongside Odin and Loki went Honir, tall and solemn, whose calm presence settled even the most heated tempers, and 2 skilled hunters, whose names drift and blur in the old texts, but who represented the countless unsung Aesir who fought and patrolled at Odin's side. The journey was not treacherous, simply long, something that Loki found even more irritating. He preferred quick victories, sudden solutions, sharp twists of fate. Hours of uneventful walking left him alone with his thoughts, and Loki with too much time to think was always a dangerous combination. Still, for a while, it seemed that nothing would come of the trek. The mountains rose before them like patient giants, their snowy peaks glistening beneath the sun. Forests whispered around them, dark fir trees swaying like slow-moving waves. Birds arced overhead. Nothing seemed unusual, but Odin's single eye kept scanning the landscape, as though he could feel the edge of a story waiting to unfold. By midday, hunger gnawed at the group, and they settled near a rocky clearing to rest and cook what little they had hunted along the way. The hunters set a pot over the fire, filled it with meat, and waited for it to cook. But when they lifted the lid, their brows furrowed. The meat was still raw. They tried again, puzzled but patient. More wood, a hotter flame. Waiting, checking, still raw. Loki lounged against a tree, drumming his fingers on the bark. "Let me guess," he said in a dry voice. "The fire is shy today." But even as he spoke, he felt a prickle of unease. The air held a strange stillness. Something unseen was watching. Finally, Odin rose from the ground, his cloak stirring. "There's magic here," he said, voice calm but edged with warning. "Magic not ours." And then a shadow shifted on the cliff above them. A massive eagle perched there. If eagle was even the right word, it was enormous, its wings stretching wider than a longship, its feathers dark as storm clouds and sharp as knives. Its eyes glowed with a strange intelligence, too aware, too calculating. This was no ordinary bird. Odin knew at the moment he saw it. Loki felt the truth of it like a cold hand closing around his spine. The creature spoke, its voice like wind scraping across stone. "Your food will not cook," it said, "unless you strike a bargain." Loki narrowed his eyes, folding his arms. "Of course there's a bargain. Mountains never simply let us eat in peace, do they? But beneath the sarcasm, Loki was curious. Deals, tricks, bargains. This was familiar terrain for him, a landscape where he felt powerful. Odin stepped forward. What bargain do you offer? The eagle tilted its massive head. Let me have a share of your meal. It sounded simple. Too simple. The hunters shook their heads in confusion. Honir watched in silence. But Loki watched the eagle's eyes, and he saw there a glimmer he recognized instantly: cunning. Something in that gaze mirrored his own. When Odin nodded cautiously, giving silent approval, Loki seized the moment. He lifted a branch, used it to stir the pot once more, and found to everyone's surprise that the meat was finally cooked, steaming and rich with scent. There, Loki said with a smug grin. As promised. The eagle swooped down. The wind of its wings sent dust spiraling. Its talons cracked stone. It snatched nearly all the meat in a single motion, leaving only scraps behind. The hunters shouted in anger. Loki stepped forward, furious at being outplayed. That's hardly a share. Loki snapped. That's theft. He swung the branch at the eagle, striking its wing, and in that single heartbeat, everything changed. The eagle screeched, not in pain, but in triumph. Its talons lashed out, gripping Loki with terrifying strength. Before Loki could twist into another shape, before he could even breathe out a spell, the creature soared skyward, snatching him off the ground like prey. The world below shrank. The wind howled around him. Loki could barely hear Odin's shout of alarm. The eagle's voice rumbled above him. You should be more careful whom you strike, Loki Lofison. And in that moment, Loki understood the truth. This was no eagle. This was the giant Jotzi, powerful, cunning, relentless, one of the most dangerous Jotun of the mountains. Jotzi carried Loki far from the others, high into the barren peaks where snow never melted and the air sliced like glass. There, atop a lonely spire of stone, the giant dropped him, leaving Loki bruised, shivering, and furious. Jotzi shifted back to his true form, a massive, imposing figure with cold eyes and hair like dark iron. He regarded Loki with the quiet patience of a predator that has no need to rush. You owe me compensation, Jotzi said, for striking me. I owe you nothing, Loki hissed, pushing himself to his feet. You stole our meal, and you struck me, Jotzi said again, unbothered by Loki's indignation. I could tear you apart, little shapeshifter. I could drop you from this cliff and listen to your bones break on the rocks below. But I prefer something else. Loki's breath tightened. What do you want? Jotzi smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. You will bring me Idunn and her apples. Loki froze. The words were simple, but their implication rattled him. Idunn, gentle keeper of the apples that preserved the gods' youth and strength, the quiet guardian of eternity itself. Without her apples, the Aesir would wither. Age would creep into their bones, wrinkles into their skin, weakness into their limbs. Idunn was the heart of Asgard's immortality, and Jotzi wanted her stolen away. You can't be serious, Loki whispered. If I do that, you will live, Jotzi said. If you refuse, you will not. The wind howled between the mountains. Snow drifted around them in slow, swirling spirals. Loki stared at the giant, mind racing, heart pounding. He did not want to betray the gods, not truly. But the cold cliff edge yawned behind him, and survival was an instinct he could not ignore. He thought of Odin's complicated trust, of Thor's suspicion, of the countless ways the Aesir reminded him, subtly and not so subtly, that he was not truly one of them. He thought of that restless fire inside him, the desire to prove himself, to shape fate with his own hands. Slowly, Loki exhaled. What if I bring her outside the walls? He asked quietly. Just long enough for you to take her? Jotzi's smile widened. That is all I require. Loki closed his eyes for a moment. He felt no victory, no cleverness, only the cold weight of inevitability settling over him like snow. When he opened them again, he nodded. Jotzi released him, and Loki transformed into a falcon, fleeing the mountain with aching wings and a heavy heart. But the real danger had only just begun. Loki flew low over the forests, wings slicing through the cold air, the world below blurring into greens and whites. though his falcon form shielded him from the worst of the mountain winds. It could not protect him from the twisting cord of dread tightening inside his chest. He had made bargains before, some clever, some foolish, some both, but this one felt different. He had traded risk for survival, yes, but he had also stepped across a boundary he had long pretended didn't exist. He had agreed to betray a goddess who had never harmed him, never mocked him, never treated him as less than one of the Aesir. Idunn had always been gentle, earnest, and trusting. Of all the gods, she was perhaps the one Loki least wished to deceive. And yet, he had agreed. When he reached the silver roofs of Asgard, he swooped down behind a quiet grove and shifted back into his usual form, brushing feathers from his hair and forcing his heartbeat to steady. No one had seen him vanish earlier. No one questioned his return. Asgard at midday was peaceful, its halls shimmering with golden light, its courtyards filled with the distant sound of laughter and soft conversation. The tranquility only made Loki feel worse. He moved quietly, slipping past warriors sharpening weapons, handmaidens weaving in the sunlight, and the occasional god wandering between duties. He avoided Heimdall's gaze. The watchful guardian was sharp-eyed, but even Heimdall did not question every strange thing Loki did. Loki's ways were simply Loki's ways. He found Idunn in the garden. The orchard lay at the edge of Asgard, protected by ancient magic, its trees heavy, with leaves the color of early dawn. In the center of it all stood Idunn, her brown hair falling down her back, her expression serene as she inspected a small cluster of apples nestled in the branches of her favorite tree. The apples glowed with a soft, golden light, not fierce or blinding, but warm and patient, like the promise of a sunrise. Even before she turned, she smiled. "Loki," she said, as though greeting an old friend. "You're back early." Her voice was always gentle, yet beneath it lay a quiet firmness, a sense of responsibility deeper than most realized. Idunn was not a warrior or a queen, but the gods' fates rested on her shoulders more than anyone else's. Without her vigilance, they would crumble, and she tended to her duty not for pride, but because she loved life in all its small, tender details. Loki felt a pang in his chest. He hated that feeling. "Yes," he said lightly, trying to arrange his face into something like ease. "We ran into complications." Idunn turned fully, brushing dirt from her hands. "Is everyone well?" "Oh yes," Loki said quickly. "Perfectly fine. Just unusual circumstances." She waited, expecting more. Idunn was patient like that. It made lying harder. Loki glanced toward the trees, their branches whispering softly in the wind. "Idunn," he said, forcing his voice into a tone of mild curiosity. "Have you ever thought that the apples might not only keep us young, but that they might work differently on different beings?" Idunn blinked, surprised. "Differently? How do you mean?" "Well," Loki said, pretending to think, "Odin has eaten them longer than any of us. Thor eats them constantly. But what of others? Mortals, giants, visitors from distant places?" He waved a hand vaguely, as though such ideas were merely passing thoughts. Would they react differently? Could they reveal something new about their nature? Or about the magic itself? Idunn's brow furrowed. For her, the apples were not a curiosity. They were a sacred duty. She did not toy with them, did not experiment on them. She protected them. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never tested them on anyone outside the Aesir. Odin never asked for such experiments." "Of course he hasn't," Loki said with a soft laugh. "He has enough mysteries to unravel. But imagine, Idunn, what if the apples held secrets? What if they could tell us something about the giants we face, or threats we do not yet understand?" She hesitated. "It isn't safe to use them carelessly." "Not carelessly," Loki said gently, thoughtfully, controlled, and only if needed. "I merely wondered." Then he softened his voice further. "Idunn, no one understands the apples better than you. If anyone could sense something new about their magic, it would be you." Idunn looked down at the basket in her hands. The apples within glowed faintly, each one perfect, untouched, humming with an ancient magic older than the walls of Asgard. "I suppose," she said slowly, "it would not hurt to look more closely today, to examine them somewhere quieter." She glanced around the orchard. There are always people passing through here. Loki's pulse quickened. Exactly, he said smoothly. A small walk. Just the two of us. Somewhere peaceful. She nodded, still thoughtful. Yes, perhaps. And Loki felt that terrible twisting inside him again as they left the orchard, moving toward the outer fields of Asgard. Loki kept his face neutral, his pace calm. Idunn walked beside him, unaware, humming softly under her breath, a habit she had when she felt at ease. She even offered him one of the apples to carry, trusting him without hesitation. The golden fruit was warm in his palm, and Loki nearly shuddered at the weight of it, not its physical weight, but the responsibility threaded through it. They passed under a stand of tall pines near the outer wall. Birds fluttered from branch to branch overhead. Each step felt heavier. Loki knew this was the moment where a different choice, a better choice, could still be made. He could stop walking. He could tell her everything. He could run back to Odin and confess, endure whatever punishment might follow. He could try. There was still time, but the pressure of Jotzi's grip still lingered on his ribs, the echo of that cold threat, the understanding that giants did not make empty promises. And deeper still was another whisper, a darker, quieter voice, urging that the Aesir would never truly see him as one of them, that he owed them nothing. That cleverness was his weapon, and survival his right. He exhaled slowly, at the very edge of Asgard, where the wall cast a long shadow across the grass. The air shimmered, and a vast eagle swooped down from above, silent as winter. Jotzi, Idunn gasped, stepping back instinctively. The apples in her basket rattled. Loki! Before she could finish, the eagle's talons closed around her, lifting her off the ground with terrifying speed. The wind ripped away her cry as she was carried into the sky, basket tumbling, apples scattering across the grass like fallen suns. Loki watched. He watched with a numbness that hurt more than panic. He watched as Idunn was carried toward the distant mountains, shrinking into a speck against the bright horizon. He watched until she vanished completely. Only then did his breath finally return, sharp, ragged, and shaking. The deed was done, and the cost had only begun to unfold. Loki stood alone in the quiet grove, where the golden apples lay scattered across the grass, each one dimming slowly, without Idunn's touch. The silence around him felt wrong, too still, too expectant, as though the very trees were holding their breath. For a long moment he couldn't move. He stared at the sky where Idunn had vanished moments earlier, carried away by Jotzi's great wings, the faint cry of a goddess fading into the cold horizon. A gust of wind shook the branches overhead. Leaves drifted down. The sun pressed soft warmth onto his skin, but it did not comfort him. Loki swallowed hard, forcing air back into his lungs. He should have felt victorious. He had survived, outwitted death, escaped a giant's grip. But there was no triumph in him, only a slow, creeping dread. The apples at his feet grew duller still. That was the first sign. Loki closed his eyes and whispered a curse, but quiet, too quiet, as though he didn't want even the air to hear. He had made a mistake that could not be undone. He turned sharply and walked back toward Asgard. With each step, unease tugged at him. He entered the golden gates with his usual stride, but something in the air had shifted. Warriors passing by seemed distracted, their movements sluggish. A servant carrying a basket of grain paused, rubbing her shoulder as though it ached. An elderly spirit sweeping the steps paused to catch his breath. Loki quickened his pace. He reached the great hall where Odin often met with the Aesir. Today, Thor was there too, standing taller than most, but not as tall as usual. His shoulders were hunched. Odin sat on his great carved throne, but a strange heaviness clung to him. His single eye, usually sharp and piercing, looked slightly clouded around the edges. Loki felt the first tremor of panic. Odin lifted his head. "Loki," he said, voice steady but tired. "Where is Idunn? I sent someone to the orchard." The trees were unattended. Loki opened his mouth, but the words caught. He had faced gods, giants, monsters, and himself, but lying here, now, felt impossibly dangerous. He tried to speak around the tightness in his throat. We were together earlier," he said slowly. She stepped away. Thor frowned. The frown carved deeper lines into his cheeks, lines that had not been there hours ago. stepped away, without her apples, without telling anyone. He stood and winced as if his joints protested. That was the second sign. Time was moving faster for them now. Age was no longer a distant rumor. Odin studied Loki with a silence that felt like a blade drawn halfway from its sheath. "This is not the day for mischief," he said. "I am not jesting," Loki said quickly. His voice cracked. He cleared it. Something happened. Thor took a step forward. "Where is Idunn?" Loki forced a breath through clenched teeth. "Taken." A hush fell over the hall, as though time itself paused to listen. Odin stood slowly, so slowly that Loki felt sick watching it. The All-Father approached him, every movement a shadow of the fluid grace he once embodied. He did not yell. He did not threaten. His voice carried no thunder, only a quiet, terrifying clarity. "Tell me what you have done." Loki's pulse hammered. The truth scraped its way from his throat. "Jatsi took her. He tricked me. No, he forced me. I struck him when he was in eagle form. He snatched me into the mountains. He demanded I bring Idunn outside the walls. He would have killed me if I refused." Thor's expression darkened. "You still agreed." Loki's jaw tightened. "I did, and I regret it." Odin turned away, gripping the edge of a pillar to steady himself. His knuckles whitened. "The apples are gone," he murmured. "The gods will wither. Our youth, our strength, everything we built, it all unravels without her." Around him, the other Aesir murmured in fear. One warrior held his shoulder as if the weight of his armor had doubled. A shield maiden touched her hair where a single silver strand had appeared. The healer heir leaned against the wall, catching her breath. Loki watched, horror pooling in his stomach. He had seen consequences before, but nothing like this. Nothing that aged gods. Odin turned back to him, and now there was thunder in his gaze after all. "You will fix this." Loki nodded. "I will." Thor stepped forward again, unsteady but fierce. "You will not do it alone. If we had our full strength, I would fly to Jotunheim myself and tear apart every mountain until Idunn was free. But now," he exhaled through his nose, frustration etched into every feature. "Now I cannot even lift Mjolnir without effort." That was the third sign. Loki swallowed hard. "Then I will go. I will find her. I swear it." Thor glared. "Why should we trust you now?" Loki's answer came quietly. "Because I am the only one who can." Odin studied him a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "He is right. His cleverness caused this. His cleverness must undo it. No brute force will win against Jatsi. Only cunning." Thor scowled, but even he could not disagree. Odin approached Loki again, leaning slightly on his spear Gungnir. Not out of weakness in the days of his youth, but now because his legs trembled. Loki felt a sting of remorse sharper than any blade. "You will retrieve Idunn," Odin said softly. "You will bring her and the apples back. And if you fail, Loki," his voice deepened, "the end of the Aesir begins." Loki bowed his head. "Then I will not fail." But as he left the hall, rushing past gods who already leaned more heavily on pillars and walked with slower steps, guilt clawed at him. His mind raced, calculating paths through the mountains, disguises, spells. But beneath all that, something deeper pulsed. He could not simply slip into Jotunheim unnoticed. Jatsi would expect that. He could not outrun him, not when the giant had wings and cunning of his own. He could not fight him in open sky, and the gods could not help. He walked until he reached the quiet room where he kept his private spells. There, he found what he needed, the cloak, a cloak made of falcon feathers, stolen long ago from Freya when she wasn't looking, or perhaps borrowed, depending on which version Loki told on any given day. The cloak shimmered with a magic older than the Aesir themselves, magic that allowed one to move not just swiftly, but freely, slipping between winds with near-silent flight. Loki lifted it to his shoulders. When the feathers settled into place, his body shifted, his bones reshaped, lightened, his arms became wings, and his vision sharpened into keen, predatory focus. He rose from the floor and shot toward the open window. The sky welcomed him with a cold gust, far colder than dawn should have been. Even the sun weakened without Idunn's apples. Loki flew faster. He crossed the plains of Asgard in a streak, wing beats slicing the air. He flew past the rainbow glow of Bifrost, where Heimdall stood, leaning slightly on his horn, eyes narrowed as though vision itself had grown too heavy. Heimdall did not stop him. Perhaps he understood. Perhaps he saw. Soon, the golden walls were behind him. The world stretched ahead, distant hills, sharp cliffs, endless plains. And beyond them, the looming mountains of Jotunheim, jagged peaks rising like the teeth of some ancient beast. Loki's wings carried him onward. As he neared the mountains, the air grew sharper, biting at his feathers. Snow blew in swirling patterns. The heights above seemed hostile, ancient, waiting. Loki climbed higher. He knew Thjatsi would not hide Idunn in an ordinary place. The giant would choose somewhere remote, somewhere shielded by magic and stone, somewhere no god would want to approach. He scanned the icy cliffs. A shadow passed over the snow. Loki froze mid-flight. A massive shape circled above. A silhouette he recognized instantly. Thjatsi, still in eagle form, gliding effortlessly, searching the skies as if expecting confrontation. Loki darted behind a towering outcrop, wings pressed tight, heartbeat hammering. Thjatsi's wings beat once, twice, pushing him higher. Snow cascaded from the peak with the force of his flight. Loki waited. The giant eagle soared past him, vanishing behind a ridge. He exhaled slowly. Then he flew lower, hugging the mountainside, carefully scanning the crags for signs of a cave or a hidden pathway. The wind screamed against the rocks, and the cold clung to him like an accusation. For a long time, he found nothing, until a flicker of golden light. It was faint, like a dying ember, but unmistakable. It leaked from the mouth of a narrow cave, halfway up a steep cliff. Loki's wings tightened. Idunn. He folded his wings and dove toward the cliff, landing on a narrow ledge slick with frost. His talons scraped the stone, and he transformed back into his usual form, pulling his cloak tight around him. The cave pulsed with that faint gold glow, her light dimming without the apples. Loki stepped inside. The air warmed slightly, though the warmth was laced with sadness. And then he saw her. Idunn sat in the center of the cave, knees drawn to her chest, her long brown hair falling over her shoulders. Her face was pale, her glow reduced to a soft shimmer. The basket beside her held the apples, dimmer too, their skin no longer radiant. She looked up slowly. When her eyes met Loki's, she flinched as though seeing something painful. "Loki," she whispered. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. "Why?" His heart twisted. He opened his mouth to answer, but a massive shadow filled the cave entrance, and Thjatsi's voice rumbled like an avalanche beginning to fall. "Well," the giant eagle said, shifting into his towering humanoid form, "it seems the trickster returns." Loki's pulse thundered. The entrance was blocked. The giant loomed. Idunn sat weak behind him. There was no escape now. Only cunning. Only one chance. And Loki knew he had to take it. Loki did not turn immediately. He kept his eyes on Idunn for as long as he dared, taking in the quiet heartbreak in her expression, the way her fingers curled protectively around the dimming apples. She was alive, but fading, without the warmth of Asgard, without the constant breath of divine life passing through the orchard. She was weakening just as the gods were above. But that weakness was nothing compared to the cold pressure filling the cave as Thjatsi stepped inside, sealing the entrance with his massive frame. The giant filled the space like a tightening fist, his towering form bending only slightly to avoid scraping the ceiling. His skin was pale and rough as carved stone, his hair dark and tangled like mountain roots. His eyes gleamed with a predatory amusement. "I see the little trickster has come back to me," Thjatsi rumbled. His voice shook frost from the cave walls. "How considerate. Perhaps you wish to strike me again? To repay the hospitality I showed you." Loki forced a steady breath through his chest. "I only came to speak." Thjatsi's mouth curled in a thin, cruel smile. "And to steal, no doubt." Loki shrugged faintly. "It's what I'm good at." The giant laughed, a sound like shifting boulders. Idunn flinched. Loki shifted slightly to stand between her and the giant, though he knew it would do nothing if Thjatsi chose violence. "You have no path here," Thjatsi said. "Even in your falcon cloak, you cannot outfly me. Even with your silver tongue, you cannot outtalk me. Even with your shape-shifting, You cannot outmatch me. The deal was struck. I have what I demanded." Loki lifted a brow. A deal struck with a knife to one's throat is not a deal. It's extortion. Jotzi's eyes narrowed. "You lived. That is enough." Loki stepped forward, the air tightening around him. "You've already played your hand, Jotzi. You threatened me. You took her. But you're holding a goddess who will only weaken without her orchard. And you're holding the apples that give immortality to beings far more dangerous than I am." Jotzi's expression flickered, just slightly. "Speak plainly." "You didn't steal youth from the gods," Loki said, voice low. "You stole their stability, their strength, their ability to keep giants like you from storming their walls. Do you think when they realize what you've done, they won't come? Do you think Odin will ignore a threat to his rule? Do you think Thor, aging or not, will stay in Asgard while a giant flaunts his prize?" Jotzi studied him carefully. A long silence followed. Loki pressed on. "You've started a war you cannot win, and you know it." Idunn watched, silent but alert. She saw the shift in Jotzi's stance, the first seed of doubt. Loki angled his body, just enough to hide the falcon cloak draped behind his back. Every second he bought mattered. "What do you propose?" Jotzi growled. Loki felt Idunn's gaze sharpen. She understood too. What was coming next could not be spoken directly, because Jotzi was cunning enough to sense a lie, cunning enough to crush Loki before he finished weaving one. So Loki did what Loki always did when cornered by someone stronger. He told the truth, almost. "I propose," Loki said slowly, "that I leave here alone. I return to Asgard and tell Odin exactly what happened. I tell him you forced me to lead Idunn out. I tell him you planned this theft." Jotzi's jaw tightened. So, Loki continued, "He will come. They all will. And they will do so with the fury of gods who feel death breathing down their necks." Jotzi crossed his arms, unimpressed. "Let them come." Loki nodded. "Yes, let them. And while they march, I fly to every corner of the 9 realms and tell the giants that Jotzi started this, that Jotzi endangered them all, that the gods, in their desperation, might strike at Jotunheim as a whole. Do you truly think your kin will thank you for that?" Jotzi's silence was not victory. It was calculation. A giant calculating meant opportunity. "And I can do all that," Loki said softly, "in less time than it takes you to break my neck." At that, Jotzi's lip curled. "Are you trying to frighten me, trickster?" "Yes," Loki said. "And also no." Jotzi blinked. Loki spread his hands. "You think I want to risk Odin's wrath? You think I want to return to Asgard knowing I lost Idunn, knowing they will punish me if she dies? No, Jotzi. I want peace. I want to survive. And I want to avoid being torn apart by gods or giants alike." Jotzi's suspicion wavered. "So you propose what exactly?" Loki stepped backward, inch by inch, guiding Jotzi's gaze away from Idunn. "I propose a delay," he said. "Give me time. Let me speak to Odin. Let me calm him. Let me explain that Idunn is safe, that you won't harm her, that no war is needed. You get time. She stays here. I return with a truce." Idunn's eyes widened, but she said nothing. She understood that this was theater, not treaty. Jotzi cocked his head. "Why should I trust you?" Loki smiled faintly. "Because I have never pretended to be honorable." A beat of silence. Then the giant grinned. "Ah, that I believe." Loki gave a shallow bow. "Then allow me to go." Jotzi stepped aside, moving to the edge of the cave. His massive form opened a sliver of cold mountain light. Loki turned to Idunn quickly. She shook her head ever so slightly, fear tightening her features. But Loki only closed his hand behind his back. A sign, a plan. He moved toward the cave mouth. Jotzi followed, and when Loki reached the edge, he sprang. In an instant, Loki unfurled the falcon cloak, transforming mid-leap into a blur of feathers. His wings beat once, twice, and the sky opened beneath him. Jotzi roared behind him. "Loki!" Loki dove off the cliff, wind tearing past him. Above, the giant shifted instantly into eagle form, wings shadowing the mountain. The chase began. Loki shot down the mountainside like an arrow loosed from a bowstring, slicing through icy air. Snow exploded behind him. Frost burned his feathers. Thjatsi shrieked with fury, diving after him, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The wind howled. The mountains blurred. Loki's wings trembled from the force of his descent. He darted between two massive spires of stone, the gap barely wider than his wingspan. Thjatsi smashed through them without slowing, shattering stone into a cascade of jagged debris. Loki banked left, spiraling down a narrow ravine. Thjatsi followed, talons slicing inches from Loki's tail feathers. Loki felt the heat of those talons graze him. He dove lower, so low his wingtips skimmed the snow. He shot over a frozen river and under a natural stone arch. Thjatsi tried to mimic the maneuver. He could not. The giant crashed into the arch, sending boulders crumbling down the mountainside. But he recovered quickly, bursting through the cloud of dust, wings beating with renewed fury. Loki's lungs burned. His heartbeat hammered like a frantic drum. But he forced himself on. He had to reach Asgard. He had to bring the gods the truth. He had to save Idunn. The sky opened ahead, clear, bright, endless. Loki surged upward. Thjatsi soared after him. Two shadows tearing across the sky. One small and desperate, one massive and enraged. The chase raced across Midgard's forests, across shimmering lakes, over plains where mortals below dropped tools and stared upward in terror. Loki flew until his wings ached. Thjatsi did not tire. Bit by bit, the giant closed the distance, until Loki could hear the rush of his wings, could feel the hot breath of the monster behind him. Loki's strength faltered. His wings shook. He could not outfly Thjatsi. He needed Asgard. He needed help. He needed. The rainbow shimmer of Bifrost appeared on the horizon, and Thor stood at its gate. He was older now, tired, weakened, but Mjolnir still rested in his hand. Barely. His knuckles white with effort. His hair carried streaks of silver, but his eyes burned with fury. He saw Loki. He saw the giant behind him. Thunder rolled. Down, Loki. Thor roared, voice shaking the air. Loki folded his wings and dropped like a stone. And Thor let the hammer fly. Mjolnir screamed across the sky, trailing crackling fire. It struck Thjatsi's eagle form with the full force of divine rage. The giant shrieked. His wings buckled. Fire burst across his feathers in brilliant arcs. He fell. Loki righted himself midair, watching as Thjatsi plummeted, smashing into the rocks below with a sound that echoed across realms. Silence followed. Loki landed shakily on Bifrost, feathers dissolving into cloak, cloak dissolving back into his form. He collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. Thor approached, breath ragged, each step heavy. Is Idunn alive? Loki lifted his head. Yes. Thor's jaw clenched. Then we go. Now. Odin appeared behind him, leaning on his spear. His posture was frail, but his voice was iron. Guide us, Loki. And Loki, still trembling, still guilty, but burning now with purpose, rose to lead the gods back into the mountains, to free Idunn, to restore the apples, to undo the greatest mistake he had ever made. Loki steadied himself on the shimmering surface of Bifrost, breath still ragged from the flight. Frost clung to his hair, melting slowly in thin rivulets down his temples. Thor stood beside him, shoulders tense, one hand gripping Mjolnir so tightly the leather around the handle groaned. And Odin, thin lines of exhaustion carved around his single eye, waited with a patience that trembled at the edges. Even the All-Father was not immune to the creeping weight of age. Lead us, Odin said again. His voice sounded like wind pressed through old branches. Loki nodded, swallowing the tight knot in his throat. He had never led a rescue mission before. Not like this. Not for something he destroyed. But guilt pushed him forward with far more force than fear. He stepped to the edge of the Rainbow Bridge and let the falcon cloak wrap around him once more. His bones shifted, feathers grew, and he leapt. Thor followed on foot, Mjolnir pulling him into the air with slow, strained arcs. Odin rode a storm-woven mount, summoned for this single purpose, its hooves sparking against Bifrost before carrying him down toward the mortal plains. Together, they journeyed back toward the mountains, but the world below them had changed. Fields that once shimmered with health now sagged under a strange stillness. Midgard's trees seemed older, their leaves dulled as if seasons had passed too quickly. Mortals looked up from plowing or gathering water, shading their eyes as three distant shapes crossed the heavens, fear and hope warping together in their faces. Even the beasts felt the shift, shying away from daylight as though sensing its weakness. Idunn's absence was echoing through every corner of the realms. Loki's chest tightened further. He flew faster as they neared Jotunheim's mountains again. The sky dimmed, heavy clouds swirling above jagged peaks. The air smelled sharper, wilder, a place where the laws of gods thinned and ancient magics clung to rock and frost. Thor landed hard on a cliffside, sending cracks rippling through the ice. Odin's mount dissolved into storm as he stepped onto the stone. Loki transformed mid-flight, landing lightly beside them. The cave where Idunn had been held lay ahead, dark, silent, too still. Thjatsi's broken form no longer blocked the approach. Where he had fallen earlier, the snow was shattered in a massive crater far below. The giant's physical shell lay motionless, sprawled like a toppled tower. But Loki knew better than to trust that sight. Giants did not die like mortals. Their spirits were stubborn, lingering in stone, and storm long after their bodies failed. The sound of the wind felt wrong, as though something still watched them. "Stay wary," Odin murmured. "Thjatsi may yet cling to the world through other shapes." Thor gripped Mjolnir harder, straining with the weight. "If he rises," he growled, "he rises to fall again." But Loki barely heard them. He rushed forward into the cave. The cold hit him first, deep, bone-rooted, emotional cold. The kind that clung to grief and fear and silence. The golden glow he had seen earlier was dimmer now, flickering faintly like a heartbeat losing rhythm. "Idunn." Loki called softly. A quiet shiver of movement answered him. He hurried deeper. There, at the center of the cave, sat Idunn, leaning weakly against the stone wall, eyes half closed. Her basket lay at her side, apples dim and cool. Her breath was shallow, but she was alive. Barely. When she lifted her head and saw Loki, she tried to smile and failed. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. Loki knelt beside her, without hesitation. "I'm here," he whispered. "We're here." Idunn blinked slow, heavy tears gathering at her lashes. "You came back," she breathed. "I had to." Odin entered then, his steps slow but determined. When he saw his apple keeper, his face changed, not dramatically, but with an old, quiet sorrow few were allowed to see. The sorrow of a king who knows how close he came to losing everything. "Idunn," he said gently, "do you have the strength to stand?" She shook her head faintly. "I feel tired, as if years are pressing against me." "They are," Odin said. "Your absence ages us all." Thor stepped closer, jaw tight with fury at the sight of her weakened state. "We kill the giant, we break the spell, and we take you home," he said. But even his bravado couldn't mask the strain on his limbs. Sweat beaded at his temple. Loki helped Idunn to her feet slowly, supporting most of her weight. She trembled under his touch, as though her entire body were turning brittle. "We must hurry," Odin said. "The longer we stay in Thjatsi's domain, the more we risk." But as they turned toward the cave entrance, a shadow moved. It was subtle at first, a ripple through the wind, a shifting dark in the corner of the eye. Then the temperature dropped sharply, frost crawling along the stone. Loki stiffened. Odin's grip tightened on Gungnir. Thor raised Mjolnir with visible effort. A voice drifted through the air, cold, disembodied, echoing like a groan of ancient ice. "You think a giant dies so easily?" Loki's breath froze in his lungs. Thjatsi's spirit, it slithered across the cave walls like black fire, gathering shape near the doorway. Not fully flesh, not fully shadow, something in between. The specter of a Jotun king, clinging to life out of pure fury. His eyes burned with blue fire. "You stole my life," Thjatsi snarled. "I will not let you steal my prize." Idunn's grip tightened on Loki's arm. Her whisper rattled softly. "We must go now." Odin stepped forward, placing himself between Thjatsi's spirit and the weakened goddess. "Your body has fallen. Your time has ended. Release your hold." Thjatsi roared, shaking the cavern. "I release nothing." Then he surged forward. The air exploded into a storm of ice and shadow, swirling toward the group, like a blizzard given rage and hunger. Thor swung Mjolnir, unleashing a bolt of lightning that tore through the spirit. scattering fragments of it across the cave. But the pieces pulled back together, writhing. Loki grabbed Idunn and pulled her tight against him, shielding her from the icy fragments. "Loki!" Thor shouted, voice strained. "Get her out of here. Now!" Loki didn't argue. He wrapped the falcon cloak around both himself and Idunn. An impossibility under normal magic, but desperation had always given Loki shortcuts, and leapt. The cloak tightened around them. Wings burst from Loki's shoulders, and they shot forward. Thjatsi shrieked as they passed, claws of shadow swiping at them. Frost burned Loki's arm, slicing feathers into smoke. Pain seared him, but he held on. They burst from the cave, cold wind tearing at their faces. Odin and Thor followed moments later, fighting back the storm of shadows with every ounce of their fading strength. "Fly!" Odin commanded. So Loki did. He soared down the cliffside with Idunn in his arms, wings beating frantically. Idunn clung to him weakly, but trusted him completely. Behind them, Thjatsi's spirit exploded from the cave in a great cyclone of fury. The chase resumed. This time, Loki carried not guilt, but hope, and that made him faster. But Thjatsi's spirit was relentless, flowing across the sky like storm clouds given violent purpose. Below them, the plains of Midgard stretched into mist. Mortals looked up in terror as a burning falcon streaked across the heavens, chased by a spiraling vortex of black ice. Loki pushed harder. His wings shook. His breath burned. Idunn's head rested against his chest, her eyes half closed. "Thank you," she whispered. "We're almost home," Loki said. But were they? Thjatsi's spirit was gaining, just as the giant surged forward to overtake them. A blast of thunder cracked the sky open. Thor had reached the height of the chase again, his hammer blazing even through the pain in his bones. Lightning erupted across the heavens, striking Thjatsi's spirit. It screamed, twisting violently as it was hurled back into the mountainside. "Go!" Thor roared. Loki didn't waste the opening. He flew straight toward Bifrost. Heimdall, watching from the gate despite his own weakening state, lifted his horn with trembling hands and blew a single note. Not a call to arms, but a guiding tone that parted the sky like a path. Loki followed that sound, followed it all the way home. As he crossed into Asgard's light, Thjatsi's spirit gave one last furious cry, then dissolved into nothing, scattered into the cold winds forever. Loki fell to the ground, exhausted, cloak unraveling back into threads of magic. Idunn collapsed into Odin's waiting arms. Her basket dropped, apples spilling across the rainbow bridge. Yet the moment they touched Asgardian ground, each one flared back to full golden brilliance. The healing began instantly. Odin stood taller. Thor's breath steadied. Heimdall's posture straightened at the gate. And Idunn, precious, patient Idunn, opened her eyes fully, strength flooding back into her hands. Asgard breathed again. The crisis had ended. But Loki sank to his knees, trembling from pain and exhaustion and the crushing weight of what he had done. Odin turned to him slowly. The Allfather's expression was unreadable. "Loki," he said softly. "Rise." Loki looked up, uncertainty gnawing at his chest. Odin extended a hand, not warm, not gentle, but real. "You have endangered us," Odin said, "and you have saved us." Loki rose, breath unsteady. I didn't mean." Odin raised a hand. "Meaning is irrelevant. Action is what shapes the fates." Thor stepped forward too, staring at Loki with a complicated expression. Anger, yes, but also reluctant respect. "Next time," Thor said, "if a giant demands something, try saying no." Loki blinked. "Are you lecturing me?" Thor scowled. "Don't make me regret not letting him eat you." Idunn walked forward then, soft, steady, her glow newly restored. She reached out and touched Loki's cheek gently. "Thank you for coming back," she said. The simple sincerity in her voice pierced deeper than Odin's judgment or Thor's scolding. Loki swallowed. Something in his chest tightened, painful, unfamiliar. Then, she smiled, not in forgiveness, not in pity, simply in gratitude. Loki looked away first. Asgard began to stir again as the apples restored vitality to the gods. Laughter returned. Strength returned. The sound of weapons training resumed in the yards. The gardens brightened once more. Life flowed back into the realm. But Loki lingered at the edge of Bifrost, watching the horizon with a quiet, unreadable gaze. He had not been punished, not openly, yet he felt the weight of the choice he made. The betrayal, the desperation, the rescue. He had done something unforgivable, and then done something necessary. This was Loki's nature. This would always be Loki's nature, a force that threatened or saved Asgard depending on the day, the mood, the bargained fate placed before him. He said nothing more. He slipped away into the shadows, cloak trailing lightly behind him, and the gods let him go. For now, because the tale of Loki and Idunn's apples did not end in triumph or punishment. It simply continued, like all stories where the hero is also the villain, and the villain sometimes holds the key to salvation. And in the halls of Asgard, where golden apples glowed once more, the gods whispered a truth they would one day regret. They could not live with Loki, but they could not live without him either.